Thank you for listening to my learning design on transforming teaching practices in a pandemic, adaptations and strategies to support hybrid models of blended learning. As we start looking at September, a lot of things have occurred that, of course, changed teachers' practice, and even us using this medium here as a virtual presentation shows that all of us have had to adapt to the changes and factors that are affecting education. Teachers themselves have had to learn new tools and approach learning in different ways, which again blend ideas of working online and working in class. It's important to understand some of the terminology. A hybrid model looks at taking some of that in-class instruction, the brick and mortar being in the building, and moving it to online or remote. That can look quite different depending on what system you're using. In Burnaby secondary schools, we either use a year-long system to teach 8 courses, or we use a half a year to teach 4 courses in a semester system. Blended learning then takes that combination of in-class learning and remote learning and develops an integration of both, or a blended approach to support the process of learning. For my learning design, I chose to narrow the target audience to secondary school teachers in Burnaby, specifically because the hybrid model has the greatest impact on teachers teaching multiple courses. In an elementary school, you may have one class with 25 students, but in secondary, you're going to have 6 to 8 classes with over 100 students that you'll be teaching or managing. That will really determine how much face-to-face time that you'll have. So to examine the problem of learning and to dig deeper on what teachers were concerned about, I was able to use data results from a survey that was distributed to teachers by the district through a platform called Thought Exchange. Thought Exchange asked teachers a question on what they considered was the most important thing for student learning in the 2020-21 school year. 500 teachers responded, and they provided comments, and as well as looked at other comments and were able to rank those and found out which ones resonated. The word cloud in the presentation here comes from the program, and it kind of picks at some of the things that were the highlights, and some of them here looked at ideas of, was there going to be time for planning? What were the expectations of learning in a hybrid model? And also the thought that there was a large amount of workload for teachers in the emergency remote period that almost felt like they've doubled their efforts. To dig deeper, I created a survey that went out to a cross-section of subject area teachers. They were each presented a variety of blended learning models and were asked to choose which ones they felt would be appropriate or something they would use in their classroom. What we found out was that 4 or 5 models resonated, that teachers in subject areas liked similar models, and that assessment, or the way the assessment was used in the learning model, was a key to how they felt the model would be appropriate for them. A literature review was performed using SFU EBSCO, Google Scholar, and literature provided by my supervisor. A focus is on K-12 blended learning research and implementation, and what it revealed about fundamental aspects of design or successful strategies. The review uncovered 3 themes. Now, each of these themes could easily be taken out of the context of blended learning and applied to any educational environment. But the first one that came up was there was an importance of creating community, social interaction, and connection with students. And that had an emphasis on small group engagement. The second was that the choice of design and approach using the technology and in-class instruction had the most impact on the outcomes achieved. And the third was, or could be summed up in one question, how prepared are students to learn in a blended model? So from that, I've come up with 3 learning objectives that I'll apply to my learning design. First, teachers will be able to understand different models of blended learning. Secondly, teachers will be able to understand how to develop connections and community in blended environments. And third, teachers will be able to understand ways to support students to be able to manage their learning in a blended environment. So I've designed my artifact as a community of practice following the work of Etienne Wenger, where the domain of knowledge will be blended learning, and the community will grow from staff that are really comfortable using blended learning models or ideas around blended learning to those that are kind of at the peripheral stage of entering in. We'll be using the platform SharePoint, which is an Office 365 tool, and it has a number of benefits, being that it's integrated with a number of other Office 365 features. I've broken the artifact into three areas. One is a webinar series that will start at the end of August or the last 3 weeks of August, and they'll follow each of the three learning objectives that were identified and break them down into four more goals along the way. The second is a discussion forum that will allow staff to discuss the latest things they want, questions around certain topic areas. And finally, we'll have resources that I vetted that have to do with blended learning, but also to do with subject area material that's supporting the creation of online content. So to get started, I created a page where staff can kind of think about blended learning, not necessarily from the idea of what model to choose, but just kind of big picture ideas. And this came from a lot of the conversations and web content that I've read with Kevin, and looking at ways in which we could kind of think of the idea of what blended model and how blended learning and how it affects teachers. It then goes into looking at specific blended models that are the ones that are the current ones out there. The webinar series is designed in a way to break down that main learning objective into goals and go through some of the ideas that are related, as well as it gives examples from teachers that have used some of those ideas or ways in which tools have been used to support that part of the goal. And so each of the sections follows that same idea of providing the main goal, the main objective, with some sub-goals along the way, broken into four goals. The discussion forum, I'll click here and get to the landing page, goes through the idea of using blended learning alongside our team, which will act as the moderators. The forum looks like this and is broken up into channels. Each of the channels has a purpose. So the how do I do that is a technical channel where there's some conversation. Subject specific will look at areas which, of course, related to certain subject areas. In the webinar channels, they'll have information that are related to the webinar series. And the advantage here is having them in the channels means that everyone would join the sessions here, as well as the session would be recorded here, and any resources, attachments, conversations, chats, all get stored here. So there is an archive of what's happened and a reflection. And in our resources page, we can you can see that we have a collection of content that's on blended learning. Other areas are where content would be related to secondary teachers. In this case, I found that secondary librarians had some great content on their sites focused on specific subject areas. A third part was providing all the open courses in Canvas from every subject area. And finally, there's a number of how-to videos and key blended learning tools that people would require. To get some assessment and feedback, we will look at engagement through analytics. The second thing is engagement through actual participation. And finally, I've created a reflection survey for each of the webinar series, following, through Kevin's suggestion, a post-pre-survey where staff would kind of reflect on what they've learned after they've done it, and to see if they've grown from their previous experiences, and see if that can be attributed to the content of the site. And that gives you an overview of my learning design, and hopefully it'll grow as changes and be flexible as changes are required in the district.